Like that. All right, so I just uploaded. You already have um, the slides for part of this lecture, and I might go a little bit to this upcoming lecture that I made slides for. Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and download those and have them up there on their files, PowerPoint, Canvas, I'll give you about, let's take a minute here, download those, bring them up. Then we'll start in like 40 minutes, 40 seconds, not minutes. Some water here. All right. All right. Cool. So yeah, let's do this. So we kind of left off on the slide that is called the woman question, which was this idea of right after the revolution. I already articulated that there were within the religious establishment who were a huge part of the revolution, and at least they were on the way on coming on top of the revolution on who this revolution belongs to. One of their kind of bigger project was to redefine the cultural and social role of women in society, right? And they are articulating this through religious language, but sometimes they're just being redefined through kind of these post-colonial discourses, right? A lot of, for example, even the people like Shariati that we talked about a couple of lectures ago, right? Like if you see like the way that how they saw that women were being used, especially in this society, they kind of saw them as being used as this kind of a new culture that supposedly some in Iran were not used to or disliked, right? Like even if you even go read people like that were in the Algerian resistance, right? Like Frantz Fanon, who's a kind of a big revolutionary theorist at this time, similar kind of sentiments were articulated, right? So anyways, one way to do this is to attack the redefine the institutions of law that have given women, for example, center rights, and to reverse back, which they do with the repeal of the 1976. And of course, from the women's section, there is immediately there is a lot of kind of confusion at this time, because some people are like, okay, so we need to be unified and everybody needs to take sacrifices and we need to protect the revolution at this time. And then there are a lot of women who are just not having it. And they're saying that, no, this is a betrayal of revolution. We fought for more rights and things like that. But nevertheless, and there's international uproar, right? Like feminists like Kate Millett comes to Iran. There is Simone de Beauvoir in France that is getting together. So even the Iranian diaspora are kind of forming groups to either voice opposition or support of these new measures. But they are, especially around within this segment of society, the women who have kind of are enjoying their new roles in society, of being part of society as citizens, they're not really liking it. So when there are demonstrations, there are counter demonstrations, some of them peaceful, some of them violent, right? Where women are beaten and thrown to jail. One of your classmates brought up women like Farouk Parsa, who are even executed. But Farouk, it's important to kind of delineate some of these people who were actually connected to previous regime, which was the Shah's dynasty, because there's also happening kangaroo courts and executions based on who was involved with what, right? A lot of people that work for Sabak, a lot of people that work for Shah, even Hoveyda, the prime minister, is executed, former prime minister. So that these and so it's not always clear, but it helps to kind of have in mind who's being executed and prosecuted for what. But they're all happening at once, and we get to a point where these kind of executions and imprisonments really kind of intensify, if you will. So if you go to the next slide, which is the Constitution, as I said, so when you're trying to change parts of the constitutional law and you want to kind of change the origin of it, because people like Khomeini have this idea of Vilayat al-Faqih that we talked about. So this, the Constitution over kind of generally stays the same, but but it is kind of this idea of how do you kind of have an Islamic republic is a problem, because no such thing has ever existed, or there's theories for it. So there is this idea of how do we make the new constitution is a democratic country that people vote for their representative democracy, better say, should have put. It is a parliamentary. There's a parliament in Iran to this day. There is the clerical oversight, which is some institutions like the Guardian Council, which kind of oversees who can even run for these positions of parliamentary positions or become a president, right? Like, are they in tune with their Islamic standards? Whatever those are, it's not ever really clear. Now there is a president. We don't have a prime minister anymore. And on top of the president, there is a the influences for this new constitution are kind of pulled from many places. Some of this new emerging communist China, the South African after its revolution, and Bulgarian is kind of a mishmash of different influences. And of course, the primary influence of it is the previous constitution, because Iran has had a 100-year almost 100-year history of having constitutional law, right? So the culture is there, the institutional there, the discourses of law are there, right? To put it together. And the Constitution of Iran is available online in English. If you want to look at it, it's always good to look at this stuff. They're not very long. But of course, constitutions, as always, are up for interpretations, and there are different schools of interpretation, and then there's precedents of how laws are derived from the confines of the Constitution. But one important thing to development that takes this take place at this time, and I'll talk about this more in this in the latter half of this lecture, is that the supreme leader, while there is an executive branch, which is the president's branch, they're kind of develops in this new role within the constitution of a supreme leader who is chosen by this the Guardian Council. It is kind of very American because there's a lot of politics involved with it, but it's a position that is for life, and these were not written. This constitution is kind of, these laws are being written as the revolution is moving, because Khomeini kind of, as I talked about, develops his own militia, Pasdaran. There happens to be this kind of its own armed forces that this other executive branch, which is the supreme leader, comes to gain its own military force. It is so there is in the beginning there is a prime minister, which is Shapur Bakhtiar, and Bakhtiar, his name should kind of be familiar to you right now, because he is connected to the Bakhtiyari tribe, right? The very Bashkai and Bakhtiyari tribe that are very prominent nomadic tribes in Iran. Bakhtiar was one of them. He was kind of a nationalist. He was a Muslim. He also had some leftist ideas. He didn't last long within the revolution. As a prime minister, we'll get to our first person, and we still have prime ministers here in the beginning days of the revolution. But Mehdi Bazargan is the next one, and here's a picture of him right next to Khomeini, and that is his after his brief service, he has to escape Iran. Usually end up dead, even if they escaped. For example, Shapur Bakhtiar, it's still kind of living under he still has, I think he lives in France. He has security guards and everything. And one of your classmates did this very wonderful presentation with beautiful slides and voiceover about the hostage crisis. So I'm going to ask him permission to put that up, but I want that to be kind of acceptable to you, because he kind of goes more into the detail. But one of the events that we have to talk about here in 1979 is the hostage taking in the American embassy in Tehran. In the 13th of February of 1979, the Fadayin, one of these kind of Islamist leftist group, does briefly take over the embassy, but because of lack of support, they're kind of kicked out, and the embassy kind of returns to his back to his business. But at this time, the U.S. does not pull its personnel out. What happens in November of that year, this body of mainly, there are these demonstrations outside of embassy. Then people start climbing the walls, and after a while, I mean, this was not planned. This was kind of spontaneous thing. There were people, because Shah had escaped, and at this time he was in America, and he's kind of Jimmy Carter is in power right now. The Iranians want him back, all being kind of their pet of the American pet, their demonstrations and other grievances, of course. And one thing led to another. These young folks, they climb over the fence, go on and take over the embassy and take all the personnel as hostages. There's a very good book on this. I told your classmate, I think the name is The Guests of Ayatollah, which is a notion that kind of Khomeini had expressed, that these are not our hostages, but they're our guests here. Which is worth looking at. There's the movie Argo, which I haven't really seen. But The Guest of Ayatollah, the gentleman who wrote it also wrote the book for Black Hawk Down, which also became a movie. So it's kind of written in a kind of action-y, very fast-paced kind of thriller type. But nevertheless, it's kind of a good perspective, right? I mean, you should read kind of bunch of stuff, bunch of perspectives with contention to this, but it's worth looking into. Um, and there is, yes, so these the first demands are, we want the Shah back, and the second one is they want the U.S. to release the $8 billion Iranian assets that U.S. immediately froze right after the revolution for some reason. Um, yeah, so um, at this time, I mean, it's interesting because at the day of this takeover, first day, like Khomeini didn't even know about it. He was given a tafsir at another location, right? Tafsir, like talking about the Quran. Um, so and at first the takeover embassy seemed like it wasn't going to last long, but it just happened that it did last for 444 years because of the momentum it took, and one by one. Of course, not everyone, but then Khomeini came to endorse it, which is kind of make it last so long, right? And people saw it as something that was kind of effective because it put kind of Iran within the global media at the point, right? And this idea of revolution at this time is slowly, gradually developing in this thing. And I'll bring this theme over and over again, that Khomeini is at first like, okay, we just want reform in Iran. Then, a couple of years before the revolution, it's like about a year that Shah has to go, then Shah goes. Then this idea becomes that we need to export this revolution. We need to kind of liberate all people, right? Especially within Muslim countries. And this idea of having these hostages and being on kind of TV and having the attention of the world kind of became a good medium for it from their perspective. But there were also, this idea of, we want the return of Iran. We want the assets to be unfrozen because, this is our country. We're kind of doing our own thing. We want the Shah to be returned, and we want a lot of people to escape to return, right? This idea of kind of judging the past, right? Like, there are people that need to pay their dues. They've escaped outside country. We want them back. So that was the deal with that. So, but the events go on, and again, I'll put this your class to see kind of day-to-day events of it. But on 20th January 1981, after 444 days, and after Iran-Algiers Accord, on the day of, I think, Reagan's inauguration, the hostages are released, which is kind of it is, this kind of event has opened a lot of conspiracies. What had happened that kind of did this release happen with Reagan, right? I mean, famously, like, Carter never attacked Iran. There's this kind of amazing kind of story about sending special ops to Iran with kind of helicopters flying very low level into Iran to go release these sandstorms, and helicopters crash. And then, this is before the release, and a lot of kind of the religious establishment in Iran that are slowly become a ruling class kind of articulated this back to the society. It looks like God is on our side, right? Like, look at this, a superpower comes and they fail within this operation to save them. Anyways, but nevertheless, this kind of the hostage crisis really kind of destroys Carter's chance of becoming a president, to become to serve for the second term, and it really the Reagan inauguration, and then there's this great trilogy. One of the books in the trilogy is called Nixon Land, that I forgot what the third book is, that is about kind of Reagan's campaign. You should really read this, because the kind of Republican tough talk of what we're going to do about this. It really uplifts Reagan's administration. This kind of former governor of California, who was an actor beforehand, but as Jimmy Carter remembers that, even on the day of inauguration, when he and Reagan are driving to the White House, Carter's trying to brief Reagan, and Reagan is like, "Don't talk to me about this. This is all your mess. You figure it out." Nevertheless, so that is kind of stories around that within our own country. But the personal release beforehand, there were some releases, like Iranians released like the African American soldiers and personnel and the women early on, kind of making this statement again about kind of universal suffrage of people of color, and that we don't take like women as hostages, but yet take that as you do. The first president of Iran is Abdul Hassan Bani Saad, who comes into presidency in 1980, and he serves till 1981. He's impeached on 1981 because he had a lot of people come against him. He made a lot of enemies, and he was, most importantly, during this hostage crisis, he was very much against this hostage taking. And he many times tried to kind of talk sense to Khomeini to go ahead and free these people. Never works, but kind of after the fall of Bani Sad, right? So there's this 1 year from 1979 till 1981, when Iran is kind of trying to solidify its institutions, because people have to go back to work and you got to restart the country, as exciting that everything is. But after kind of trying this prime ministership and trying to establish the Islamic Republic that is constitutional and parliamentary and democratic, there are hiccups in this, because there are a lot of people that are not very happy about having this idea that suddenly these Shias from Qom are ruling them. So things kind of turn ugly real quick. And this, I'd like to mark this with the kind of impeachment of Bani Sad, who was one of these reformers, who also happens to escape Iran. He's still alive today, and you've seen him in some of the documentaries that I've sent you. But at this time, the government kind of turns against its enemies, right? So he has kind of dealt with the United States as it sees itself as this kind of this kind of blow to this superpower as they see it, which I don't. But now it is time to turn inward, right? Especially when you run out of the old royalists to execute or kick out of a country, or ask for back to execute or kick out of a country or in prison. They turn into the Islamists who don't agree with them, the liberals that don't agree with them, especially the leftists that they don't agree with them. There's another enemy in this that I'll talk to you about in a second. But I guess I always wanted to, I have this idea about Carter's administration, who gets a lot of back, a lot of criticism over years about being weak. I think, at the end of the day, the release talks at this time that were like, let's go invade Iran. Let's bomb the shit out of them. Let's go get our people. And I think at that time, at this point, so Carter took the most kind of diplomatic way, but it did cost them a life of his political life, because after that he was pretty much done, even though he's very active today. So this era, this 1981 kind of begins this era of starting to purge the country. And I've talked about this idea of we need technicians. We just need to know who the loyal folks are within our society. So that's when this is started. So your slide should be over now. So if you can go and open, just give you a little time to open it. This time, there is in this, in the 70s, Saddam Hussein has had his own revolution, which was kind of backed by the West very much so, because the previous regime, who were kind of a socialist democratic regime in Iraq, who had a revolution against this kind of a post-colonial mandated state monarchy, right? And Saddam comes and kicks those people out under the Ba'athist Party, which has this pan-Arabism philosophy. But kind of in the 70s, Saddam Hussein kind of reinterprets that pan-Arabism into a kind of expansionism, right? Rather than like, oh, we need to liberate all Arabs under one flag, is that I want a lot of these other countries. So and his Arab neighbors are not very. The relationship between the kind of the most important alliance at this time during the Shah's time in the 70s is Iran and Israel against especially Saddam Hussein and these other enough to be take over. Second of all, he has this very kind of realistic fear, because Khomeini starts talking about in the beginning of the 80s, there comes a slogan that is through Karbala puts, right? Like this idea that we want Karbala, right? We want to liberate. This is coming from Khomeini. We want to liberate that southern part of Iraq where most of the Shias are, and all those important Shia landscape like Karbala, where Imam Hussein was martyred, and to make our way to Jerusalem and to liberate Jerusalem, right? See, like these old themes are coming back, right? And this is an idea that Shah didn't really have, but Khomeini is certainly talking about it. So kind of Saddam Hussein has this ambitions, Iran has a will, all this stuff, but he also has a fear. Like he has to do something with this revolution, because first and foremost, I gotta say, he doesn't want the same revolution happening under his rule, right? Because Saddam is, you should watch the videos of him when he's going to his Congress, and he's taking these representatives, reading their names and taking them out and getting them, getting the ones he considers loyal to shoot the ones that he think they're disloyal. The executions when he's walking these people out. So he does not mess around, let's just say, and he does not like anything that he sees as threatening to his regime. So in September of 1980, Saddam Hussein passes Chateau Arab, which is this it's basically Chateau Arab means like Arab River. He crosses the Chateau Arab, which kind of delineates the southern border of Iran and Iraq, and there's a map there. It's very close to Basra. Right, these are the old Babylonian lands. Right, Mesopotamia is in this very fertile area, and goes to Khorramshahr, where Abadan is. And you've heard me talk about Abadan because the refineries, there are a lot of refineries, oil refineries in Abadan. And of course, then there are the shipments of oil that are crossing through there, right? So there are a lot of forces present there. You've seen the British Navy being present there for a couple of 100 years, but now it's the U.S. Navy that are there to this day. They get into skirmishes. Anyways, so Saddam kind of surprises everyone, as he does, like with this Kuwait thing, to later on in the 90s, to attack Iran. He does this in September of 1980. He wants to go ahead, take the Khuzestan, take Abadan, and he has plans, it turns out, we learned later on, to then start going north and taking over Tehran. So the plan is very ambitious. It's not just like carving out, let's take a province of Iran that is oil rich and is very fertile, and and you have to consider, right? Like if Saddam would have, let's say, succeeded in this, like to take over Iran's oil production, Iran is still a mono economy at this point. I mean, Iran is to this day. So if he had taken that, dude, I don't care. Like, even if, let's say you believe in God and God is with your revolution, if your country doesn't have money, not that the revolution would have been over, the country would have been over, right? And at this point, nobody would have kind of stood up to him. As it turns out that they won't, and I'm talking about the international nations. So Saddam goes and attacks Iran, and this starts a very kind of brutal conflict that goes from 1980 till 1982. But Saddam is, and the world is kind of surprised on kind of how kind of devoted Iranians were at this point, because there is this mass movement of consolidation on the war, right? On the, with this ideologies of religion and history, to go there and join the military, and then there's conscription to go and fight. Shah is liberated. Iraq is pushed back. Iraq even offers a peace deal, and Iran says no. And from then on, Iraq, at least to get the southern part, right? I mean, again, the goals are not clear. Khomeini just wants this war happening, and there are many reasons for that, right? One reason is just kind of politics 101. The crisis brings the consolidation of the population, right? One of the first things that happened after Corona was that Donald Trump's approval ratings went up. Right. George Bush was very unpopular till he invaded Iraq. War presidents of crisis usually win. Now, we have seen people that don't, so you have to manage it and sell it in a way that gets you, like, I'm taking care of business, because that kind of view of the crisis can change within the populace, but usually it's a very kind of sure way of succeeding, right? It's that saying of Rahm Emanuel, right? The Chicago politician, not letting a crisis go to waste. This is it. So Khomeini and his ilk kind of see this mobilization on the war in the name of Islam and nationalism and all these ideologies as something that really consolidates the population. And on the other side, you can say that any opposition to anything within our country is the opposition against your country, right? So suddenly, if there are women's asking for their rights back, or the liberals want a better democratic institutions, and if the leftist want labor rights, and if the Kurdish want more autonomy in their province, you can just take all those oppositions and be like, look at these disloyal people who are probably traitors, right? And it's kind of not legally, but it at least it buys you some kind of political capital to go ahead and eliminate them. So at this time, when this kind of the war turns the situation around, Khomeini and Khomeini's government, let's just say, really goes after oppositions within the country, right? And this idea, at this time, this idea of the martyrdom of Hussein and those kind of not so popular Shiite imams that we've talked about, it feels like 5 years ago, a couple of months ago in our lectures, those kind of small skirmishes against these Shiite imams, against against the caliphates, right, that were ruling from Baghdad, right? These kind of huge empires, like that language comes back. So Iranian religious establishment that is now running the country starts articulating, kind of putting today's situation within those linguistic forms, like that we need to be martyred for our cause, doesn't matter how dangerous. So there are a lot of kind of young men are taken to the front, and they're used for um, for example, like clearing landmines, right? Like go ahead, walk on these landmines. Your prize will be the paradise. But another kind of question here is that's not, dear God, if I can, I've tried to make my computer not give me. Sorry, guys. I have to do not disturb on, but my email kind of overrides it, and it takes over all of the screen. Another issue that's not really talked about. Remember all those kind of boring number talks about like how much the Shah was fond of buying weaponry from the West, right? Especially the United States. I mean, Nixon came and he was like, you have access to all of our catalogs. Take what you want, as long as you keep this oil prices balanced, right? Go ahead. So another kind of Iran surprise success is because Iran has spent this past 20, 30 years amassing military hardware and equipment, right? Now, and the army is pretty much, the army went ahead and, a couple of those people were executed, but the army's still there. And now you have all these young forces who are energized from the revolution, and you can kind of bring them in. But there's also Pastaran, and now there is this new development in history of idea of, I've used this word before, proxy wars, right? Of getting kind of different groups that are not part of your nation to fight battles with you, but kind of the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians in diaspora has really kind of redefined that technology of terrorism and proxy war between those both countries, right? So given the equipment and the money from oil and the existence of this young, out of work, some of these people are very, very young, and the already existing army gives Iran a huge upper hand to go ahead and use all of this. I think a good parallel of it is like reading about the Battle of Barbarossa between German and Russian forces in the Second World War. This idea of kind of like when Russians are like, we're sending everyone, really sending forces in here. And this kind of really helps. But there are kind of things that are working against Iran. Being supported by Soviet Union, which is Soviet Union is not really sure about Iran, right? Because their experience with the Islamists was that when training Taliban at this time, who are mostly Saudi fighters, to go attack Soviet Union from its southern borders, like provoking it into Saudi extremists in Afghanistan, right? And so USSR is not having the best of time with those with the Islamists right now, even though Khomeini does extend a hand to Gorbachev and at this time. But they have an established relationship with the Saddam, and they pursue it. So they start selling Saddam weaponry. U.S. is selling Saddam weaponry, weapons, and also France and England too at this time, and some other countries. So they have kind of international support in this war, right? They're given, of course, intelligence, right? That Iraq has chemical weapons, which had been banned in World War I, but they're using it. The main one is mustard gas. I refrain from putting pictures of gas attack in your slides because they're very gruesome. I'm kind of squeamish. I know I talk about video games, violent video games and stuff. You're welcome to. There are a ton of pictures of chemical warfare. It is, yeah, I don't have words for it. It's just beginning in like 83, 84, this bombardment of cities with civilian areas of cities, like up until to Tehran, right? I mean, that's a lot of, you have to travel very far to get to Tehran with a jet there, but they did them anyway. And there's aerial bombing, and then there's missile attack, right? So as you can see on the Iraq side, Iran is kind of getting some of it, but Iraq has a lot of a lot more kind of capability of both sending missiles and sending airplanes to really destroy Iran's industries and civilian portions of the cities, basically bombing cities, which is kind of, I mean, we talk about like events like Dresden, firebombing of Dresden, this idea of in World War II that we still are debating in military circles about, can you break the will of the government by breaking the will of its people, which usually comes by bombing the people, right? Not just the front, not just soldiers, not just military targets. But U.S. definitely did it in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And in before North Korea was in North Korea, right? Like U.S. Would bomb dams, right, to flood cities, and which brought a lot of mass hunger and drowning. Anyways, everybody's doing it at this time, so it is also happening in Iran and Iraq war, and both sides are taking part in it. Kind of pictures, you also see the chemical attacks that are marked by yellow. If you see the area, which is on the top northwestern corner, right? So that top one, which touches Turkey, those are kind of the Turkish areas of Iran. But that area, those are Kurdish areas. So the both, and you see them on both sides that are happening. So Saddam at this time heavily kind of attacks its own Kurdish population and Iranian Kurdish population, right? Which are, or to kind of, again, declare. We have gone over, yeah, this is good enough, because then we can kind of, so in the next lecture on Monday, I'm going to talk about what kind of the war does within Iran again, not to kind of get too much talking about the Iran-Iraq war. There are good documentaries on this, do watch them, where you don't, where I don't have your submitted work, right? So whatever grades I have for you are up there now. I know some of you submitted some papers that I'm going to grade and fix those, but try to give me whatever you have till Sunday, right? Because soon you'll have to start working on your exams, right? We have another month. And that will be the end of this class. So do submit whatever you have to submit, please. I want to give everyone this semester has been hard enough for everyone. Anything you need, extension, help with something, you want me to explain something more, whatever question you have, please do contact me and we'll take it from there. Okay, yeah, so I will see you guys on Monday.